welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host, ObjectivelyDan, and you might notice that I'm not quite joined by anybody yet. So, let's make a long story short. I had Cyrus the Skeptic plan to come on today. He tells me he's coming home from Godless Iowan's wedding, says he's going to be running a bit late. He tells me this about 10:30 this morning. I say, cool, I'll try to figure out somebody else. I was going to get Courtney Stewart from Atheist Edge, who was gracious enough to come on at the last minute. Unfortunately, for the past 45 minutes or so, we've been trying with some technical difficulties to get her on, and it turns out that it's not working out. This is what happens when you have a show where you run into all kinds of people with all kinds of systems and stuff, and we're trying to coordinate and make sure that everything works together, and sometimes it just doesn't. But here's the good news. If you guys know Jamie Boone from Talk Heathen, which I'm sure most of you do, he has agreed to come on. Of course, I messaged him about this maybe 5 minutes before the show started, so he's still getting his stuff together, but hopefully he'll be joining me in a little bit. Until then, let me tell you guys, we're at over 2,000 subscribers on Truth Wanted right now, and that is freaking awesome. We have only done a few official episodes now, like past 4 or 5 or so, and already you guys have shown a lot of love to this show. I am just so excited to see where it grows through all of its bumps and trials as well. Today is one of those bumps and trials, but we seem to be getting a really good positive reaction from people. I've been reading a couple of your emails that some of you guys have been sending. That email address, by the way, is truth@atheist-community.org. And I've been seeing a lot of positive responses to the way that I in particular have been having conversations with people, and people seem really receptive to that. And also just the broad range of topics we've been able to cover. I'm hoping that we can cover a lot more. Besides just the typical kind of religious stuff that you usually see on a lot of the ACA network shows, which is fine, and it's something that's worth talking about. But I think, especially since I'm using a lot of street epistemology methods of talking to people, trying to see what people believe in general, I think that kind of broadens the scope of what this show can do. I'm excited to talk to you guys about Bigfoot and UFOs and conspiracy theories and hollow earth stuff, all kinds of really weird and interesting things. And I think that we can do it and have a really fun time with it with some really fun guests. Of course, we have to have those guests on the show, which we don't at the moment, but that's okay. And we also need callers to do this show. So if you want to call into the show, the number is down there on the screen. We are completely open on our lines right now. We are just waiting for you guys to ring in. We have one caller coming in right now who's being screened, but I think I'm going to go ahead and take them on the line. You are live on Truth Wanted with ObjectivelyDan. Hello.
Hello. It's DeLon from Irvine, California. How's it going?
Hey, how's it going, DeLon?
Hey, man. Just thought I'd call back. I know we had a nice conversation last week, and Ty and you guys gave me a lot to think about, so I just wanted to give you guys a call back and
yes, that was the show. That was a really fun conversation last week. I'm really glad you got to call back.
Because I know you said you had other questions that we kind of got sidetracked from, and I wanted to maybe you could give me some things to think about, maybe give me some ideas here that might help me out on that whole discussion,
Yeah, so if you want, can you kind of maybe remind the audience who wasn't here last week what we were kind of talking about and stuff, and maybe what you've been thinking about since then?
Absolutely. So the topic of the conversation was consciousness is fundamental in the universe, was my proposition, and fundamental meaning irreducible. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of went on and talked about that, and one thing led to another, so we kind of went into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so what has some of the stuff you've been thinking about since then? Like, what has changed since that conversation?
Ty said something that was really interesting at the end. He was mentioning that if you can't really distinguish between two worldviews, then there's really no value, or there's nothing that you can really say about it one way or the other if two worldviews kind of equal the same thing. One of the things that I was saying was with consciousness being a fundamental property, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm adding anything or that anything really changes in the real world, that what we observe are simply the contents of the consciousness that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And so Ty was saying, well, being that that's the case, then there's really no difference between a materialistic worldview and a consciousness-based worldview, I guess. And so I got to thinking about that. It's pretty powerful point. And I kind of looked into it, thought about it, read a lot about it, was looking at, kind of ran across something called Russellian monism.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what happens is, and it kind of got me to thinking that maybe the problem isn't so much a hard problem of consciousness, it may be a hard problem of matter and energy that I'm talking about, right?
Okay.
So the idea in that case, and it's kind of the same thing, basically what is matter? Is it really understood completely? You know, and what I come to find out is that today there's no really definitive answers to that question either.
Mm-hmm.
There's not even a consensus about what the answer should even look like. Rather, there's like multiple interpretations of quantum theory, which corresponds to a very different way of regarding matter and everything about it. Basically, that means everything, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and the bigger point is, as yet, since there's no way to experimentally, if you will, distinguish between these different interpretations of quantum mechanics, then it kind of leads to the same situation that Ty was referring to.
Mm-hmm.
So whichever one we mainly, whichever explanation of quantum mechanics we choose is kind of arbitrary. So we kind of just depend on what, philosophical temperament you may have, right?
Yeah, I think
this arbitrariness
mm-hmm.
in deciding which interpretation to hold completely undermines the strict materialist position by definition.
Yeah, it's
because if, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. I get 100% what you're saying. And I just want to clarify for those of you who aren't keeping up with this conversation, because we're throwing around a lot of terms here. This is like philosophy of science kinds of stuff. So this problem has gone back for long stretches of time. It's been changed by a lot of different points of view, and quantum mechanics has also changed that point of view as well. It's this idea of how we can know the things that we know on the most basic of levels, because ultimately we are things made of matter and mass, and things interacting with other things made of matter and mass, and we're part of the same system that we are kind of observing, and that kind of makes some problems when it comes to evaluating things. So you may have heard of this thing with the Copenhagen theory of quantum mechanics or interpretation of quantum mechanics. I mean, there's all kinds of these sciencey terms and stuff, but basically it's this idea of when you're analyzing two different. I should clarify. I have no idea what I'm talking about, right? I have not gone to college to study physics or anything like that. But my basic level of understanding is when you're observing something, you're using light and maybe some other kinds of particles or things in the universe to observe other parts of the universe, and the act of actually observing things can actually affect what's going on in the quantum realm. That's one interpretation of the things that we're seeing, and it's because we're using very specific tools to measure these things, and we're making very specific measurements, and it all comes down to this idea of what's even real, right? What is outside of the universe? What does that even mean? What's inside? And it can all be really, really, really confusing and really, really huge. It's quite a topic to start on tonight's show. But I'm glad that Ty's observation of what we were talking about last week kind of, made you think about this a little bit more, because most of the stuff that we're talking about here goes over most people's heads. It goes over my head when we talk about this stuff, right? And it doesn't matter to the daily life of people, but to the people who think about this a lot, who make careers out of talking about this kind of stuff, it's really, really fascinating when you get into it.
Yeah, it definitely is. And, I'm not an expert either by any stretch of the imagination. I just, it all starts from really simple questions. what is reality? What is real? Like I mentioned last week, I engage in street epistemology. I'm always asking people and coworkers and friends, how do they arrive at the things that they believe? How do you get there?
Mm-hmm.
And I just apply that same method to myself. And then I start thinking about, well, what is the absolute fundamental or premise of my epistemology, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's that I'm conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And going from there, I can kind of ask about the reality of, what's the nature of reality. And it just kind of took me on this deep rabbit hole, of course. And I'm not the only one that has these sort of questions. It's nothing new. Like you mentioned last week, it goes all the way, even before Descartes, all the way back to, Plato and
Mm-hmm.
Socrates. And it goes way, way, way back. And, some of the confusion there is, to me, is everything just seems like, culturally, especially here in the Western culture, we sort of, if you look at the history of religion and science, science used to be called natural philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of an agreement that, natural philosophy wouldn't step on matters of spirit and vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so science itself kind of set up this objective sort of way of looking at nature. It definitely wouldn't look at things like soul, spirit, God, any type of those type of questions. But, the thing is, as science progressed, especially with quantum mechanics, we start having, the observer effect, and a lot of these things started coming out that pointed to consciousness role in the universe. I mean, as it turns out, we're not really objective because we're part of the universe that we're observing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if consciousness is part of reality, then
Except me.
it's also part
I'm objectively Dan. So that
I know. yeah, exactly. But
some people don't get that about my name. That
rarely.
Yeah. I just want a side comment. Some people don't get that my name purposely doesn't actually make any sense, and that it's just kind of a joke thing. It's a whole explanation of why I think it's personally funny. But some people take my name and they say, "Oh, you're supposed to be objective about everything. You're objectively Dan." It's like, not really. I'm just, I don't know. I'm as objective as the next guy on a lot of things.
It's kind of curious.
Yeah.
Atheism, right? Like, whenever I read Objectively Dan, it kind of reminds me of Ayn Rand in a way.
Oh, well, no. My name has nothing to do with objectivism, the philosophy, for sure. Definitely not.
Okay.
My name quickly, I guess, because I don't think I've actually told this story on air, so I'll go ahead and say it. It comes from this idea of talking about objective morality. This was something that I thought about a lot when I was kind of on my way out of Christianity, of whether we could call something objectively good or objectively bad. And I just thought, I had questions about whether that was even a coherent thing, because it almost sounded like you were using names for something that could be replaced with anything else. Like, oh, you could say that's objectively good. I could say that this is objectively Dan, because it's words and it's semantics, and it's just kind of funny the way that we can combine these things that don't actually mean anything unless you give a certain context to them. So now my name is Objectively Dan because I say it's Objectively Dan, which makes it Objectively Dan. From a certain standpoint, I mean, it's still, you can argue about whether or not that's actually subjective or not. Whatever, it doesn't matter. See, these rabbit holes, they keep going down and down and down. My name is just kind of a reflection of this kind of nonsense world we live in sometimes that needs to be worked out and talked about with people. But anyway, I was interrupting you. You were talking a bit more about your idea of the history of science.
Yeah, so we kind of established that. That's kind of where, as far as my education goes, that's how I understand it, at least here in the West, is that this objective type of viewpoint kind of saturated natural philosophy.
Yes.
And that principle has always kind of stuck. And quantum mechanics kind of threw a wrench in that whole Newtonian physics, mechanics type of idea of a clock, a watch, clock mechanical universe, right?
Yeah, for
sure.
Very
random, very weird. And there's all kinds of interpretations about why we have all this quantum weirdness, and I don't want to get into all of that.
For sure. But you make an excellent point. You do make this
Yeah.
excellent point that the history of Western science, as we've known it, has been this. A lot of it has been this categorization of things, and sometimes has led to problems. Like people have rightfully pointed out, just because like the scientific consensus of something is out there does not mean that that thing is true. I mean, for example, this idea of phrenology was a science of itself, and it relates back to this idea of like scientific racism. This idea that we can categorize people into these hierarchies based on these quote unquote objective values of people. And which can lead to like strife in people because people think they have this information in them that's objective, that makes it somehow right or more correct, when really it's just it's this more like a categorization of certain types of knowledge and even facts, which facts is another word in itself that has problems, because you can call a fact maybe an empirically established, point of data, but even that can have problems because what you mean by empirical. So, there's these problems that we use in our language that that creates kind of these hierarchies that separate people and bounds people into these boxes that, we've kind of been breaking out of in recent years. With how we, categorize and identify ourselves. The LGBT movement is a great example of that. It used to be, of course, that homosexuality was categorized as this mental illness, which is not the view, and it hasn't been the view for many decades now. But it still has been an idea culturally ingrained in people's minds. So even science as a culture can... or a scientific culture, if you will, can affect the way that we process our information and, affect the way that we can understand the world in a way. And
well, absolutely. I mean, talking about fundamental consciousness, like I said, there's different versions of fundamental consciousness. And a lot of this stuff, especially in the beginning years, I think I started looking at this stuff about maybe 10 years ago. And even at that time, because at that time, science really started to take consciousness serious, but it was more or less the neural correlations of consciousness type of study, that kind of stuff. And only recently have they really been looking at panpsychism, these other versions of fundamental consciousness type of ideas. And one of the things that kind of was the big problem for so many years was that, well, it just seems like to postulate or suggest something like fundamental consciousness seems so unintuitive and it seems so weird or strange in some way. But remember, I mean, the theory of relativity, the fact that time slows down as you speed up, I mean, evolution, the fact that we're related to common ancestors like apes, all of this stuff was unintuitive too.
Yes.
Really crazy.
Now, I
Even
would be
quantum mechanics. We were just talking about that. I mean,
yeah.
So being strange doesn't necessarily equal false.
That's true. Although I would be careful because that same and it is a valid criticism, I'd say, or point of defense that you're making. But there's a lot of people who practice this kind of woo. This kind of really out there stuff that will say the exact same thing. And they'll say, well, they used to believe that the earth was flat, which wasn't the case for a lot of European history, at least. And be like, this is just the next revolution in science. We just need the big scientific people to accept this. They're refusing to accept this because they're dogmatic. These are the same people who, creationism, for example, a lot of people in the creationist movement say this about scientists who talk about evolution. So, I agree with you in that we should be open-minded and we should be looking towards other explanations for things. But we need a certain criteria on how we accept these explanations and not just accept any kind of speculation, right?
There you go. Thank you so much. That's a really good point. Because a lot of the resistance to a lot of ideas are because it gets kind of mixed up with the tinfoil hat crowd, and the pseudoscience crowd. I met one. Speaking of that, I had the pleasure of meeting a professor. He's a neuroscientist. He's got a background in physics, and he teaches out here at the University of Irvine, right? and he's postulating the fun, and this is a lot of where a lot of my ideas come from. Just being able to sit down and talk with him, and he teaches his approach to this whole thing. And he told me one good point that he said, the difference between science and pseudoscience is science seeks to disprove hypothesis.
Yes.
And pseudoscience works backwards. Pseudoscience makes a hypothesis or some kind of theoretical idea and seeks to prove it, which is the most easiest thing you can do.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, so when I'm studying this fundamental consciousness question, I'm not trying to prove it's true. I'm trying to disprove it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's the difference. You go into it with a whole different mindset.
Yeah.
And, and there's a lot of progress being made in that front, mathematically and everything else that you kind of, hit me to. But
mm-hmm.
yeah, it's to your point, you've got to be careful. There's a lot of woo-woo people out there that's smuggling. That's why I always say, even if consciousness is fundamental, it shouldn't change anything about what we observe. I mean, patterns and irregularities in nature still hold true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why would they all of a sudden miracles become true and all of that?
Right? Yes, for sure. And this idea of disconfirmation goes back to this guy named Karl Popper, who talked about the science
mm-hmm.
of the philosophy of science, excuse me. And this the word of this is called this, falsification. I like disconfirming things is also another way of saying it, but it's this idea that we can, I've said this before, explanations for things are cheap. You can make explanations for anything. I could say all the lights are working in here because there's a spiritual manifestation in each one of these light bulbs that happens to react every single time we turn the light switches on. Okay, so that's coherent, right? I mean, at least there's some form of logic to it, because there are different kinds of logic. There's some form of logic to it. But how do we know that explanation is true? And we can test it with other explanations and see which one of these, there's a couple of different things. I mean, Occam's razor is one way of looking at it, seeing what the fewest kinds of assumptions we can make. And again, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but I think it's important that we even have these kinds of conversations in the first place, because like you're saying, pseudoscience in general is trying to make these all-encompassing theories about everything that we see, and it kind of leads people into these traps, because the more explanations you have for something that explain the most amount of data, sometimes it's hard to get out of those explanations. A great example I have of this is this idea of the Earth being 6,000 years old. If you talk to somebody, you said, oh, well, if I said, well, the evidence kind of makes it look like, based on this, this, and this, that the Earth is actually several million years old. And then somebody could say, well, God made the Earth look old. That's a thing that people say and people put out there. So it's okay, well, how do you defeat that? Or not defeat that, but, how do you engage with that kind of thinking? Because again, you're making more and more assumptions, and you're expanding unproven ideas. Right, because we haven't even established the existence of a God, in this conversation scenario. So, again, it's a whole thing of conversations. But I'm really glad that you are taking some of this to heart, because this is what I love, this kinds of stuff. But it can be kind of deep for some people, especially if you're not initiated in what a lot of these perspectives are talking about.
Right.
But I'm really glad that you're invested in this. Sorry?
Did you have any questions that you?
I'll ask you this one question, because Ty brought this up last week, and it was this idea of, okay, so consciousness is fundamental to your worldview. Have you figured out a way of comparing, your idea of the world with another idea? Do you have a method by which you can demonstrate that your ideas are true? Have you figured out any way to verify that? Or is that something you're still thinking?
Yeah, I've got some idea. I mean, of course, it's an ongoing, look, but I mean, I've got some really base ideas here.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at, I think we talked about emergence a little bit before.
Mm-hmm.
And, with the strict materialists, they're saying that dumb matter, somehow if you just combine enough dumb matter in the right way, voila, genie comes out of the bottle. And you've got consciousness, right? And so that creates a huge combination fallacy and a huge categorical error, because you're talking about physical properties leading to something immaterial like consciousness or thoughts or something like that. So those are the two things that kind of turn me off from materialism just from the get-go. There's other things, but that's the main thing. But with fundamental consciousness, I can see, and this is kind of demonstrated within nature itself, is that let's say that emergence is true. Let's say that, our neurons in our brains are like little supercomputers that are all intelligent on their own. They network together and they kind of emerge into this super consciousness that we have, right? And then there's, even below that, there's certain things that account for how neurons work, the combination of things. Well, the only way that emergence is going to work in that way is if pieces of matter, there's some sort of inner life to matter. I mean,
what do you mean by inner life to matter?
Yeah,
what makes that
science
different from like regular life?
Science.
I guess.
So right. So let's take. There's a concept out here called proto-consciousness, right? It's this idea that if something as small as an electron or a molecule or something like this has some sort of awareness. I mean, it may be unimaginably, measurable, but we see it because it reacts to its environment and it reacts within itself. In other words, it has a cause onto itself. It causes things to happen even to itself, whether that's to,
Okay.
Let me give you an example.
Before you give me the example, I wanna clear some things up here. I believe I want to say Dinesh D'Souza was one that kind of talked about this idea that even like molecules and bits of matter had consciousness. And I think you're kind of skirting around. I don't know if this is what you mean when you say this, but it's kind of similar to this idea that you're talking about the tiniest bits of matter have consciousness within themselves, and you're saying that putting these things together somehow makes a bigger consciousness.
Like a principle. It may even be like a principle that, we need to discover.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
Because
my first reactions to this is, why would we assume that because these things can, matter reacts in a certain way, that why would we even call that consciousness? What are we calling here at the base level that we get to call consciousness? Because clearly, there's bits of matter that are happening at the local level. Are we saying that this is the same thing that's happening at the macro level? If we say that, do we need to call that consciousness in order for that to? Do you see what I'm saying? I think that
I see what you're saying.
How do we know that emergence isn't just a property that comes from matter coalescing together? Why do the individual bits need to be conscious in order for consciousness to come from individual bits?
So that takes care of the genie out of the bottle problem, because that's the whole problem. What they call the hard problem of consciousness.
Hard problem of consciousness. Yeah.
Right. The hard problem of consciousness is defined and it's accepted by most of science. They know that this is a hard problem to solve. It's really a big mystery. And the reason it's a mystery is because of the assumption that matter is dumb. It has no principles or any way of leading to consciousness. I'm not saying that rocks are consciousness or anything like that. But if particles, subatomic particles all the way up to particles like atoms have some sort of intrinsic awareness, or I don't even know if you want to call it consciousness. Maybe we don't call it consciousness.
But see,
maybe we call it something else. But whatever it is, whatever that ingredient is, whenever a system integrates that information and is able to process that information in a systematic way, then the light show turns on. The light and sound show may turn on, especially in brains, to whatever extent. It's just kind of arbitrary to create this dividing line that separates something from conscious and something that's not.
Well, I don't know. Let me give you an example of why I might disagree with that. Just as a counterpoint, because I don't know either way. But like, for example, this one doesn't anymore, but this cup has water in it. And we know that water has hydrogen and oxygen molecules. And we know that a property of water is wetness. Wetness is kind of, some would say intrinsic to water, or helps what defines what makes water, right? But do the hydrogen molecules and the oxygen molecules, do they have to be wet themselves in order for, that to be a thing? And, my understanding of chemistry, which is pretty low compared to like other sciences, would have to say no, because we know that when we combine these things in other forms and stuff, that they don't have to necessarily be wet. So for me, I'm saying this idea that consciousness is actually an emergent property, it seems to still fit with what I understand of how science can operate, or how molecules can operate, I should say. I don't know that I have to agree with the premise that says that individual molecules have some sort of consciousness, if that makes sense.
So this is my only reservation about that.
Okay.
Is wetness a physical property?
Okay. So that's interesting, because we have to know what physical property means, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Yeah.
And
see, that's where I'm at too, because wetness, for me, if I'm gonna take the word of it from say I speak to a materialist, right? It says, water everything's material. The entire universe is material. Everything is, right? So then they say, so wetness is a physical thing. Well, then it's no big deal that you can combine two physical things to emerge a different physical phenomenon. That's fine. That's totally logical, and I agree with that 100%. But what we're talking about is physical properties giving rise to immaterial properties.
Now, but have we ruled out the idea that mind is a physical thing, though? Like, it's just a physical thing?
Very good. There we go. Now we're getting down to it, right? So exactly. So my thing is that mind and material are combined, because when we talk about fundamental, we're talking about irreducible. So if, and I'm not going to say that this is necessarily the case, but if material has some sort of principle, or it's embedded with some sort of inner life to it, or inner subjective, perspective to it, then it would make sense that emergence could happen and bring about consciousness if, configured the right way, right?
Yeah.
That would make sense, because now we're talking about the same sort of substance leading to a different pattern of substance. It's just like emergence within behavior, right? Let's say like weather. The hurricanes are, become hurricanes because of the warm water in the ocean that meets with the air above it, and it kind of changes. Or you can look at the financial markets, certain trends and confidence for what the president may say or do will affect, maybe trade, which affects, the way people
chaos theory, essentially,
behavior, all of this is kind of behavior, Those type of examples of emergence, they all seem to stick together within their context, but you wouldn't expect behavior to lead to some physical thing, right? And vice versa. So that's what I mean. It just seems a little more consistent.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. Gosh, I want to keep going with this conversation, Dylan. This is so great, but we have been talking for a little while now, and we have other callers that want to talk. Absolutely. I would absolutely love it if you called again next week, and we can continue this conversation, because this has been one of my favorites so far on this show. I really enjoyed this a lot.
Oh, me too, man. And you guys always give me stuff to think about, so I do appreciate that,
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so I'm going to go ahead and end this now so we can move on to other topics. But thanks again for calling, man. I look forward to this next week if you can.
All right, brother. No problem.
All right. And with that, it looks like my co-host has showed up. How's it going, Jamie Boone?
It's going very well. And I think, in my defense, if I can say this and reveal a little bit of backroom, whatever, I think from call to be on the show to being on the show in 45 minutes is a testament to the guys in the booth and their skill. Because my understanding is that I haven't legally changed my name to Courtney, but
Not yet.
Not yet. Wow. Let's see how interesting this night gets.
We can do some interesting things on Truth Wanted.
Yeah.
A lot of things happen here. A lot of people don't know about. So
I
anyway,
didn't know if you wanted to do a recap a little bit of the previous call. I heard some of it. And
man, you gotta study your material, Jamie, because this call happened. We started this conversation last week with my last co-host, and that was kind of a continuation of that. And we're just talking about the philosophy of mind a little bit. How is consciousness fundamental to reality, essentially, and like what that statement even means. Again, this is just casual fun, but this has like been one of the deepest dives that we've dived so far, and I want to save it like just a little bit so that we can kind of go deep and then go casual and kind of go back and forth and make it a little variety for everybody. So we're just going to go ahead and go on to our next caller. Okay. So our next call is from Ruth in South Carolina. Ruth, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And I have a note here.
I can hear you as well.
Yeah. And I have a note saying that you have some family members who have been trying to invite you to church.
Continuously.
Okay. Every week. And you have a problem with that because you're not a believer, I'm assuming?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Go on. Sorry.
It's okay. It's become kind of as if I'm hurting their feelings when I've got to the point now where I don't respond. Mm-hmm. Because I used to respond and say, no, thank you, in some kind way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But now I just don't respond because it's become, I almost feel like it's a game.
What has your conversations been like with them before? Have you simply told them no and they're just not listening, or?
No, and, that it makes me uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So there's some reasoning behind it, but it's not just, no, I don't want to go with you. And it's in particularly one of them that is quite a Pentecostal church, very, and that's the one that every week,
not casual,
every Saturday I get the call, and I'm expecting the, hi, how are you? How was your week? And I get the, you really need to go to church with me. Your life would be so much better. Guilt trip.
Yeah.
Which is
for sure. We can, Jamie and I can both relate to this really so much. But I'm really glad Jamie is actually here because this is a topic that comes up quite frequently on Talk Heathen, which is the other show that Jamie hosts. If you haven't watched it, you should go check it out. So I'm going to let Jamie give his answer first, since he's kind of talked about this before.
Yeah. So as far as your family member or family members that want you to come to church, and they ask you every week, oh, you should really go to church. You should really go to church. You should really go to church. Yeah, and this is a hard thing. You're by far not the only one this happens to. My parents and I actually probably are a bit closer and see more eye to eye on, or well, they have a better understanding probably that I am not eager to attend their church. And I sort of accept that that's a thing that they're doing. But again, my parents are Episcopalian, and so it gets very different when, they're not every week in church are they reminded that people that don't go to the correct church are going to hell, right? Like there's a difference from denomination to denomination, and it sounds like
into an Episcopalian church is it that? But my uncle made the comment, it's like Catholic light.
Yeah, it's like Catholic light.
Yeah. It's the same. They do a lot of the same ritual as the Catholics. They don't have the same hierarchy of structure, so they don't, adhere to the Pope or any of their subsequent councils and stuff. They have their own kind of system.
Yeah, and there's the veneration of the saints is different.
No, for sure. Can I ask you if So, like, have you ever? Is this a situation where you really just don't want to talk about it? Like, you don't really want to engage with them at all? Or is this something where you might be interested in talking to them, but you just wish they were more open-minded about it? Like, is there, like, do you want to have the conversation about religion with them? Or are you just like, I'm done with this point. I kind of just want to, leave this be?
I'm kind of done with it
Okay.
at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you been to their church with them before?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I'm not sure how blunt you're
That's not
comfortable.
the type of church that I grew up in. I grew up in a very strict Baptist church.
Southern?
And I'm not. Yes. Well, no. In California, they don't call them Southern Baptists. They call them Independent Baptists. And they're very. I think they told me that in the South it's called holiness or something, and that they, it's very women wear long skirts and hair in a bun, and women don't talk, and it's very. I don't know how to explain it, but anyway, I have not been church goer for 17 years, and so it's not a secret to the rest of my family and my immediate family here. And I almost feel like they're sad, or I've hurt their feelings when I tell them no. I don't know.
So
Maybe. Oh,
it's
go ahead, Jamie.
Possible that they have those feelings, but also it's your Sunday.
Yes.
What you do with it. My parents, they're not. It might be fair to say that they're disappointed in the direction that my life has taken. I've managed to talk to them and tell them some of the things that I'm doing, and try and get them to see that at least I'm not lazy. But I don't go to their church with them. Can I ask you, Ruth, how you would describe, what you believe, whether you'd call yourself an atheist or an agnostic or a free thinker or that?
I would say I call myself an atheist. I don't believe in any.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Me neither. Welcome aboard.
I'm not sure that I'm agnostic, because I don't definitely believe there aren't any, or there couldn't be any, but
Yeah.
But
you sound like you're about where I am, but I end up being involved in an organization and doing a show. So you're in good.
Yeah, Jamie's one of those militant atheists you hear about.
Yes, I'm a lieutenant colonel in the military. No God.
If I may comment on, I mean, I'm sure Jamie has some advice all wrapped up and ready to go, but I'm going to interject anyway because I can do that. I think if that were in your situation, which I have been before, by the way, with my own family and stuff and what I'm doing now, even I'm in a very similar boat with Jamie, where it's like, well, I'm working towards something, and I'm trying, at least with my show, I'm trying to make something really positive out of what I'm doing. And it's not just about, being irreligious. It's about exploring things together and making it more of a, communal activity. And all this to say, I think maybe when having these conversations with your family members, it might be good to frame it with the language of, hey, when you invite me to church every week, you're kind of disrespecting my beliefs and like what I, and my own sense of, human, because if you knew a Jewish person or a Muslim person and you were inviting them to church every week, that could be considered offensive to most people. Because you know that these are people who are practicing their own faith and they're living their own lives. And you're living your own life. You are figuring things out through the way that you understand it. And that's something that deserves people's respect, whether you have a label of atheist or agnostic or whatever you want to call it, because, you're a person with your own thoughts and feelings too. And I think that maybe that's kind of the focus that you want to have when kind of having these conversations,
Well, I guess that's why I called your show and asked this question, because, I've watched Truth Wanted a few times, but I watched the other ACA shows religiously, so sorry to let that one out of the bag. But but because the point is, I don't want to go to their church with them because to me, it's not the truth. I could totally find something else to do with my day that is much more factual, truth finding. I just feel like it's and I guess that may be the biggest aversion that I have, is that I feel like it's a way to delude themselves, or it's I understand it's about comfort. It's something they've always done, but the type of church that they go to is very I guess that's called Pentecostal. They're very loud, and they probably the one time that I went with them, I have an issue with acoustics. It bothers me, like, physically. It causes me, like, blood pressure and heart issues, and I don't.
Yeah.
And
so it sounds like you have more than one reason besides the fact that you're an atheist that you really just don't want to go to this thing. I think that it's I can see that for sure. It's hard to talk about these things. Like, it is so hard for me to tell people this is what I do every week now, and I've made this part of my life. And people can, like, if you're not confident about where you are, then people will sometimes take advantage of that. And I'm not saying that you're being passive about your beliefs, but I might recommend that you take a more active approach to the defense of, like, yourself and who you are, so that people can see that there's a boundary, that there is a line that people are being crossed, rather than, get the invite every time and kind of just shirk it off and say, oh, no, maybe not. Maybe try taking a more proactive approach and saying, like, hey, I'm actually upset that you're doing this, and, like, let them know that, because, like, I have a boundary set up here that you are violating, and it frustrates me, and just letting them know, like, how it makes you feel and stuff, because I think people will respond to that a lot better than just playing into this narrative that, oh, you're just this bad person you just need to get to church and then you'll be fixed right up. Because no, you are living your own life, and you're doing life, what sounds like to me, pretty well, without going to church, and people just need to accept that. And
thanks for that affirmation that I'm doing life pretty well.
I mean, I don't know anything about you, except for the fact that you're an atheist. But it sounds like you've made it this far in life without going to church for the past couple of years or so.
17.
So, that's a blessing in some form. Right? Anyway, I hope that helps.
So, before we jump off, I'll add one more piece of advice.
Yes.
As well. So, one of the things that has been said on various shows, and that I know that Matt Dillahunty, at least I think that Matt Dillahunty said with his parents, I'll try not to steal his story, but it's something close to what I've done with my parents, which is, if you believe that there is this God that loves all of us, and that has the plan for all of us, and that has a path for everyone, if you need to pray on it, but if God loves me and has a plan for me and has a path for me, then let me walk it, right? Saying something like that. Or there's almost a way to address their concerns in terms of their theology that could help them deal with the fact that they're not going and knocking on your door and handing you a chick tract and telling you, oh, cantaloupes are of the devil or whatever. And I feel like, in particular, with the heavier, like the Pentecostal, the more, serious churches, that couching well, look, you're not respecting, like, me and whatever it is, and it makes me uncomfortable to speak in spiritual terms to people that take those terms seriously. But to say, like, look, no, I'm on my own journey through life, and I think you should let me take it, is probably something that they can do.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
Good advice as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, Ruth, that kind of gave you some ideas about how you want to frame this conversation next time. And again, I recommend a proactive approach, just getting it out there yourself instead of waiting for the next time it happens. But it's your life. It's up to you. I wish you luck. And
Thank you.
Yeah, just keep doing what you're doing, because it sounds like you're doing just fine.
I think the proactive approach is probably a lot better, because if you wait until they're thinking about it and really concerned about it, then they'll already have but if you talk to them on like a Tuesday, you're just like, hey, can you please not ask me this question on Saturday?
Yeah.
What Dan said is good advice.
For sure. All right, Ruth.
Well, thank you both for the advice.
Yeah, thank you for calling.
And call back in here or one of our other shows.
Yeah,
for sure.
Even. Absolutely.
I'll try not to.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you.
That was really, really awesome. Not typical to what we've talked about so far in Truth Wanted, but perfect for you, Jamie. I'm really glad you got to weigh in on that conversation.
Actually, I'm thinking about it. If she wants to call back and you want to maintain your thing, she could end up calling back to talk heathen, and then we'd have like a cross pollination.
Got to get that cross promo going on.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
That cross promo.
Any of the ACA shows, she should definitely call. There's got a wide variety of content to offer here on this network. It's really fantastic.
Including
here's the list of our products. No. So I just want to remind people that we have a lot of open lines, and we are ready to take all of your calls. We'll probably go until around 7:30 or so. We'll see. But we definitely want more people to call in. So if you have something on your mind, feel free to chop in. But while we wait on your calls, we'll take on this next call, which is from Dylan in Florida. Dylan, what's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, I'm good.
Hey, Dylan.
Hold on one second. I have a neighbor screaming at me.
Oh, okay.
What?
Neighbors and they're screaming.
Oh, neighbors.
What a time.
Hello?
Yeah, hey, what's up?
Hey, how you guys doing?
We're doing great. I have a note here saying you wanted to talk to us about Pascal's wager.
Yes, okay. So I know that you guys over at the show, you guys are personally atheists. Now, me being a Christian, I would say as far as physical proof, I would say that you guys are, really nailed on with some stuff. And what I mean by that is, I could see how a lot of things physically are true in atheist perspective. Like I know you guys were talking about earlier that the Earth, there's a lot of people who say it's 6,000 years old, but due to the proof of everything in nature in general, how it could be millions of years old. Mm-hmm. And I could see stuff like that. But because you guys are atheists, you may not see it from a spiritual perspective. So when you think about it from that perspective, I know a lot of people say, oh, well, why would God allow rape and murder and all this in this world? And because God is omniscient, right? When we try to explain it from, and even atheists, you guys can agree that there are some messed up people in this world, and their morals are messed up. So even if you guys may not believe in sin, you still may agree that there are some right and wrongs in human nature. So,
well, I'm going to go ahead and stop you right here, Dylan. Thank you for calling, by the way, and I'm glad that you're ready to have this conversation with us. But you've already said a lot, and there's a lot to unpack there. So I want to take things kind of step by step a little bit. So it's interesting that you're talking about this spiritual perspective. And I want to kind of deconstruct that a little bit more. And I want to give you a little bit of background about myself and Jamie. Jamie and I are actually both former Christians. We both grew up as Christians. I'm not 100% sure on Jamie's take on this, but I actually served in ministry in some capacity. I baptized people. I did all kinds of stuff. And so I understand this idea of spiritual, but I also know that it can be local to the peoples who are talking about it. Not everybody agrees on what this kind of, spiritual word even means. So when you say we have to understand things through a spiritual perspective, and you mentioned like the age of the earth and some other stuff about morality, what is it about a spiritual perspective that you have that I lack that's telling you information about the world that I don't already know?
Well, I mean, because you are a former Christian, I'm sure that you believe that, Jesus, he has the power to heal and whatnot. And
I currently don't believe Jesus had the power to heal in a supernatural sense. Did you mean when I was a Christian?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I did have a belief that Jesus had. There was a historical figure named Jesus who could heal things. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, and this is where, like I said, I agree with you guys on as far as because you guys are atheists, there isn't a lot of proof, or maybe it's because you just lack belief. However, that's why I came in and called because of the Pascal's wager. Now, personally, the reason why I believe is kind of more of scared rather than what happens after you die, rather than just saying, oh, here's proof or whatnot. And I get there's plenty of other religions, and I'm going to get to that in a second, why I chose this one religion. But Pascal's wager, I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. And, if there isn't a God, right, and I'm a Christian and I'm right, then I have nothing to lose, right? But if you guys are wrong, then you're kind of screwed in a sense. But if there is no God, right, and I'm a Christian, people are going to say, oh, your life is wasted because you believed in God or whatever. Personally, I don't care. We're going to be 6 feet in the ground rotting, and we're going to not have any knowledge of what happened in our life. Not going to have a knowledge that we existed. We're just going to be literally nothing but a decomposing body, right?
Yeah.
So either way, if you die in that sense, I mean, honestly, that's where I kind of got it at a young age, because right now I'm 16 and I've been a Christian since I was in the 4th grade. And at a young age, I never really understood it, and I honestly never thought about it. I just thought about playing basketball and living life. So,
Dylan, let me ask you, do you find Pascal's wager to be a convincing argument for you for the existence of God, or at least why you should hold a belief in God?
I would say it's partial. I'd say a good solid chunk of 75% of it, of the pie, because...
I just want to get a yes or no out of this, because I have a follow-up question to this.
Yeah, I'd say yes.
So I'm an atheist, but there are about 1.8 or so million Muslims, right, outside in the world. So you can imagine, maybe I'm a Muslim, or maybe you know a Muslim. And what if this Muslim came to you and said, well, Dylan, if you don't believe that Muhammad is the prophet of God, then you are going to hell. And
well, I mean, if you take a look at it from the perspective, right? Most of the time, and I'm sure you guys have read the Quran.
I'm asking, just to clarify, would you find that argument convincing?
I wouldn't take it into context personally because of my belief, but I would give it a good thought, because I'm an open-minded Christian. I'm not like one of those stubborn Christians where it's like, Jesus is Jesus.
Okay, well, Dylan, let me ask you, if you don't find it convincing that you might go to hell if you don't believe in the Quran or what Islam has to teach, why is it that you would expect an atheist or anybody of any other belief to believe in Christianity for the fear of going to the Christian hell?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure.
My dog was on my lap.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned Pascal's wager. You're saying that we should believe because otherwise we might go to hell. So it's kind of either if you believe, then you get good things. If you don't believe, then bad things happen, so you might as well believe. But we could say the same thing about other religious beliefs. We could say the same thing about Islam. If you might as well believe in Islam because you're going to go to Muslim hell if you don't. But if you believe in Islam, then you're going to go to paradise. Or you could say the same thing about Buddhism. Well, it may sound kooky, but if you believe it, you might get reincarnated as something good. Same thing with Hinduism, same thing with Zoroastrianism, same thing with lots and lots of religious beliefs that have come over the years, hundreds and thousands of them. So if we can say the same thing for all of these religious beliefs, why should we make Christianity the one that we focus on?
And this is where I was actually going to get to after my question is, I definitely agree with that point that we couldn't really know what religion is the correct religion. And like I said, I'm an open-minded Christian, so I'm not just going to be like, oh, that the other religion's false because they say it's false. You take a look at a lot of evangelists like Ray Comfort. I'm sure you know who he is. He's called Banana Man or whatever.
But you do believe in Christianity, right?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so like, what is it about Christianity that is compelling you to? Is there something besides Pascal's wager? Because you almost make it sound like there is something else besides Pascal's wager that's compelling you to believe in Christianity.
Okay, so here's why I believe personally. Like, I've looked at a lot of other religions because, for me, I'm curious what happens after death, to be honest. Like, I mean, I'm 16, I have a long life ahead of me, but, death could be around the corner. When it's my time, it's my time, to be honest. So it's kind of like I've looked into other religions and stuff. And as I notice, I do read and I do find out that if you don't believe in this certain Muhammad or any of the other prophets and other religions, I tend to find out that if you don't believe, you're going to hell. But it's more than that. I realize that most of it can be based on good works, right? If you're a good person, you go to heaven and you get 72 virgins or whatever they believe in, right? And that's what I noticed with a lot of other religions. But when you look at Christianity, right, it's a free gift to anybody who wants to seek Jesus. So when you take a look at a lot of other religions, if you live a good life and you live to the standard, and when you take a look at like the Quran and whatnot, their beliefs as a Christian, don't steal or whatever, they're pretty similar to Christian.
But you're saying they're different because it's kind of a
Muhammad.
works-based theology is kind of what you're saying, and that makes it. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I want to let Jamie get into this conversation, but I'm going to go ahead and ask my question first, and then Jamie, you can kind of maybe take over on the conversation if you want. But let me ask you, because I asked kind of about like the truth of what makes Christianity true, and you kind of pointed out a difference to me between Christianity and other world religions. And I agree that Christianity, while being similar in some ways, is also very distinct compared to a lot of religions. But the fact that it's different from, for example, Islam, the fact that it's not based on works, as you were putting it, does that make it any more true?
Well, what do you mean by any more true?
Yeah, so like my original question was, what is compelling you to believe in Christianity? And you gave me an answer of, well, Christianity is different from Islam, and you gave Islam as like an example of other kinds of religions. But my question is, okay, so we've recognized that there's a difference, and I agree with you, there is a difference. But how does that difference make Christianity more true than Islam or any other religion?
Well, that's where faith comes in, and it's like I understand, and that's where I understand. Like I said, it's with you guys, it's more of proof based rather than faith related. And for me, just being a Christian, I couldn't tell you to be 100%. That's why I believe everyone deep down is agnostic, whether you're an agnostic Christian or agnostic atheist, because we don't know what's after death.
And you use faith to believe in something and be wrong about it.
I mean, I wouldn't consider just outright wrong, because then I would have a belief in it in general.
So, but like Muslims, for example, can have faith in something, and you might consider them to be wrong about what they believe, right?
Well, yeah, I would look into it and see how that would affect my life, or what I'm trying to say, for an example, is like, I would see how their Quran, is that correct, what they believe in, or what book they use, the Muslims, right?
That's one of the holy texts that they use.
Yeah, it's the main one.
Okay. So if that was correct, I would read it and I would see. And what I've gathered...
Well, hold on. Wait, let me stop you here, Dylan, because reading it to see if it's correct, that's not using faith, right? Isn't that using something else? Are you using some other method to determine that it's true? Okay, so if there are, it seems like there's a difference between using faith to know something is true and using some other kinds of methods, like maybe science, for example. And
what is that other method you're using?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat that? On the other line, Jamie sounds like he's speaking through like a Jupiter microphone. I don't know.
Jamie was asking.
My microphone.
Jamie was asking, what other method are you using besides faith?
I mean, that's practically about it. Honestly, if you would have told me, if you would have came up to me and said, this is the reason why I'm an atheist is due to belief, I would have been like, and I had no idea about Christians or Muslims or whatever. I would have been like, hey, you guys have a point. You guys are right. But that's where my faith comes in on a spiritual level. rather than just the physical level, because like you said, I could be wrong one day. Like I could be like, oh, this is Christianity is wrong and Muslims correct and religions, but what I believe in, like I said, I'm an open-minded Christian. I'm not here to argue or on a massive debate.
I super duper respect that, and I'm really glad that you called. And for someone at 16, that's way braver than what I would do. I wouldn't have called into an atheist talk show at 16 if we're an atheist talk show. I guess that we are in this case. But let me ask you this, because I think we're coming really close to something really interesting. Do you think faith is a reliable method of knowing whether something is true or not?
I don't feel like it's more of a reliable method. I feel like with due time, things kind of come into place when you realize what your faith has been holding on to. Sometimes it can become a reality and truth, but then that's where, and you made an awesome and a brilliant point, how would I know that my religion is correct? And personally, I've grown up in a Christian household. I mean, I know a couple people in my family that are atheists, but they're not as open-minded atheists as you guys would say. I wouldn't say they're militant. I would just say they don't believe in God simply because they think we're from matter or Big Bang or monkeys or whatever. They just believe they're atheists. Hold on a second.
Interesting.
Yeah. Did we lose Dylan? Or
he is still on the line right now.
Okay, he might be taking.
Yeah. Hey, are you there?
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah. So you're kind of saying you have you consider us more open-minded atheists, and I do appreciate that compliment. Although I would consider that,
given the sign right behind you.
Well, open-minded, right? But I would say, it might be worth having more conversations with them in general, because the things that you're telling me, they think that we all just come from matter and monkeys and things, and that's why they're atheists. I would inquire you to maybe have deeper conversations, because I know from talking to other atheists that we often get stereotyped with these kinds of assertions, but they may not necessarily be true in that sense. But
yeah. And that's where I agree with you guys, and I'm glad that you guys are really nice about it, because from my majority, the most people that I know that are atheists, most of them, they seem to be very hostile towards my religion, and honestly, I don't appreciate it. Like, I'm not over here talking about atheists are a bunch of retards or whatever. I think that they're very smart. I just don't believe in what they believe in, and
what do you think it is that me and Jamie believe in?
I just don't. I think, and personally, I've never seen your guys' talk show. I mean, I know with the atheist experience, I've saw a couple of videos on Russell Glasser. I'm sure you know who he is. And, I've seen videos on him, and I haven't really seen your guys' talk show, but from what I could guess, I would say that you guys don't believe in God simply due to a lack of evidence, I'm guessing. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure. I'm just guessing.
Well, Jamie, what do you think about that?
I think that's pretty close, actually. It's as a result of examining these claims and examining God claims that have been made, over history and about all kinds of various religions, realizing that they are all making the claim on the same basis, asking myself, okay, well, there's two people making a claim and saying, I know it's true because of faith. I know it's true because of faith. And I know that just based on the claim, they can't both be true, right? So, for example, Mormons say that Joseph Smith is a prophet of God, and Muslims say that the last prophet of God is Muhammad. Joseph Smith came after Muhammad. Therefore, they can't both be a prophet of God. It's not true that Muhammad is the last prophet of God, and it's not true that Joseph Smith was then later a prophet, because this is a contradiction. So they can't both be correct. You can't have all the religions correct, but there's no reason why they can't all be wrong, right? And there's no reason why each individual religion examined, as it provides about the same kind of evidence and makes the same kind of appeals to faith, seems to me to be a testament to the failure of faith as an epistemology. So one of the things that you said earlier that was interesting is you've said a few things that I've heard before, which is separating evidence-based stuff and saying, well, but on a spiritual level, right? And you say, oh, but I believe this on a spiritual level. Well, no, I disagree with that characterization. I think you believe the things that you believe in the same way that you believe everything else. You hold conclusions, and some of them are about the existence of a God. And so I would ask you a couple of questions. I think you called about Pascal's wager, and we can return to a focus on that if you'd like, because there's so much more we can talk about on that. But if you're going to determine whether or not a proposition, whether or not a conclusion, whether or not a proposed explanation is true, would you use the method of, well, I believe it is true based on faith, or I want to know more about this and examine what that claim means as far as reality? Like if I made a claim like, oh, you know, I can make this glass levitate, right? Would you say, I believe that you can based on faith? Or would you say, show me?
I mean, for me, I would feel like kind of show me, but at the same time, that's kind of, I'd be like safe,
So-
I'd say in between answer, but I would probably say show me at first, to be completely 100% honest.
Yeah.
And that's
So-
good that you're honest, by the way.
It is.
Yeah, because I'm not going to just be like, oh, show up on the show and just, like I said, be closed-minded.
Well-
I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
Jamie can tell you there's a lot of adults on this show that call in and aren't honest about some of their answers sometimes. So I mean, we really respect the fact that you're being honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
I would be
Ray
like,
Comfort
show
called
me,
it the
show me
atheist
that you can make that levitate,
Yeah. So I don't know if Jamie had anything more to add on that, but that's very interesting that you would say to Jamie. I'm sorry, Jamie, do you want to respond? I'm sorry.
A little bit. So,
yeah, go on.
So if you're wanting to ask and know the truth of propositions, and presumably your goal, at least in part, when thinking about a God, is to know whether or not a God exists, right? Whether or not this is true is important, right? Whether or not I could actually, through, magic of the like stage magician variety, make a glass levitate is probably a less important assertion to you than whether or not a God exists and what happens after we die. That's an assumption, but I wanted to ask to make sure I'm getting that correctly. Yeah, so there are things that we care about more and things we care about less, right? Like whether or not my friend who says he had eggs for breakfast is unimportant, right? If he was saying he had the best eggs ever and that he had leftovers, and I would say, prove it. Or if I said I can make a glass levitate, you would say, show me, right? But for a claim that is unbelievably important, that changes fundamentally the way that you live your life and changes, in some ways, fundamentally the way that we would think about what is true or how to come to truth, you appear to be applying a lower standard of evidence.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do have two more questions, though, and they're going to be shorter than the other ones, but...
Here, can I just redirect on that last statement I made in the terms of a question?
Well,
do you think it's a good idea to apply a lower standard to determine whether or not a God exists? Or even which God exists, if you're at that point?
Sorry, repeat that again?
Do you think you should apply a higher or lower standard to test the truth claim of a religion than the truth claim of what I had for breakfast?
I'd probably go higher than that.
Right. Because while you've said some things that I can disagree with you about whether or not Islam it's scripturally fundamentally a faith of works-based theology, it's kind of not, you have to say the statement of faith in these things. But if there is a God and you're worshiping the wrong one and that God is vengeful, then each time you go to church, you're making him angrier and angrier. And for people that are just trying to examine claims and come to the truth, and you've been very honest so far, which is why I feel like I can go down this.
Fantastically honest.
Yes, yeah. I'm actually kind of jealous that you called into Dan's show instead of...
I appreciate it. I
You can call in this Sunday, but I'll try not to talk too much longer or steal all your callers, Dan. But if you're trying to think about some of the most important things you believe in life, I would encourage you to think about them as critically as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
I'll
to
definitely give
have
them
your
a long
conclusions
thought,
be... Sorry?
I said I'll definitely give it a long thought,
Yeah.
And there's no reason to stop thinking about it, right? Mm-hmm. Truth does not fear inquiry.
Yes. Let me, I want you to, if you have any more questions you want to ask us, I think you definitely should. But I want to just put in my 2 cents here real quick before you do. Mm-hmm. And this is coming from a very personal place because I was not much older than you when I was thinking about this very, very seriously. And I was having very similar thoughts to how you were. And throughout my process of doing it, I don't know how you feel about this, but I felt pretty scared because I thought that I was making somebody upset, whether it was God or my church or my family, because I was questioning these kinds of norms that people accepted for a majority of their lives that a lot of people didn't really think about on a day-to-day basis. And that made things really, really hard because I didn't feel like I had anybody to talk to. So I too turned to the internet and people that I thought were really smart and let them talk about it for me. But the reason why I bring this up is because the first thing you want to talk about is Pascal's wager. And Pascal's wager, to me, is such a frightful thing because that says that you want to believe in something or you choose to believe in something if you understand it in that framework because there's consequences if you don't. And if that's your understanding, I want to implore you to not worry about those consequences right now, right? You are very, very young, and if there is a God, I think he would want you to figure him out and to think about things a little bit deeper and not just say what everybody else is doing. I think part of what Jesus' message was to go against the crowd a little bit and to kind of do things your own way and figure out what's best for people. That's a very loose interpretation, but I think it's important to your spiritual journey that you think about these things as it was important to my own. So I'm trying to encourage you here in saying that I hope that as you keep continuing to think about these things, that you don't let those consequences cloud your thinking or affect it in ways that it shouldn't, because it definitely did for me. And that's why it took me so long to get to the conclusions that I did, because I was afraid of a lot of things. And I'm just encouraging you as an atheist, so maybe that doesn't mean much to you right now, but just, in as a passing friend saying, I'm not scared anymore, and I hope that you aren't feeling scared as you're thinking about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate talking to you guys. I do have 2 little quick questions because I know there's some other callers.
Go for it.
All right. So my first one would probably be like, you guys are atheists, and I know that you guys do have morals. I know that there's a lot of religious people who say atheists, they don't have morals, they're evil people. All they do is want to go after someone's religion. And I don't believe that's true, because I've met some atheist people who are way nicer than some of the Christians that I know. Like,
me too.
Yeah, I've met some people who, you think, oh, they don't believe in God. They just believe a whole bunch of people are monkeys, but yet they treat people in such a nice way. They're so caring, they're so giving. And then I've met some Christians where they're so hostile and they're so mean and disgusting. And it's kind of like, I don't know what's wrong with that person. He's not very Christian-like. He's not acting Christ-like. So for you guys as an atheist, where do you say emotions on, maybe you guys don't believe it on a spiritual level. I do believe on it in a spiritual level, but where would you say you believe that emotions like crying when you're sad, people you love, people that you hate, where would you say that comes from? Because I know not a lot of people talk about this on a general basis, and I simply don't believe it's just a motor neuron in your head that's telling you a signal that's, you're feeling sad. I personally don't believe that. I feel like there's something more to that,
I think it's quite a complicated process. And you're right that it's more than just neurons. It's neurons also interacting with an environment and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and answer first, and then I'm going to let Jamie give his response. So one of the things I studied while in college was the science of anthropology, which is the study of human beings. And one of the things we study in anthropology is lots of other primate species that are very similar to us in physiology, but different in a few clear things. And one of the things you notice when you study other animal species is they at least exhibit some sort of type of emotion. And that's really, really interesting. Now, there's scientists that disagree on what these observations mean and whether these kinds of emotions are the same in the same way that humans think about them. But they do definitely respond, and they do seem to come from physiological processes. When you are cutting up an onion, that makes you cry. You know, that's a fact that can be demonstrated over and over again. So that kind of tells me that crying isn't necessarily a spiritual thing if it can be done through very normal physical processes, unless you call those physical processes spiritual, and that would be kind of a semantic distinction. But it seems to me that although these emotions we feel are often overwhelming and quite complex, on some levels they can actually be looked at empirically and under a microscope in a sense, and we can look at the cause and effect reactions that happen when we feel these things. Jamie, what's your take on this?
So my take on this is that feelings of love and hate and thoughts of confusion and curiosity and the desire to eat when you're hungry or cry when you're sad or be warm when you're cold are all results of similar functions of a human being. One of the things that's difficult, nigh impossible to get across in words is this idea that I think arises naturally when human beings are just sort of thinking abstractly about how they function and how they are and, oh, I'm feeling, my fingers rub together. But when you push back on that, particularly if you are, particularly if you can get into a meditative state, but just if you're thinking about the sensation of experience and what that means, you can push back on that and push back on that and recognize that this idea of a self that we have that's separate, that's other than who we are, doesn't really hold up to muster when we examine things through microscopes, when we examine things in a psychologist's office, or when we examine ourselves. What I will say, because that's something I've thought about a lot, Dylan, unless I'm remembering it correctly, you said you're 16, and you're thinking about these things, and you're looking through your life, and one of your concerns is what happens after you die. Whether or not you change your belief, I'm excited to hear about your career, because you appear to be a very driven person who wants to know what direction your life is going to go and wants to know what's true and accurate and find goals. And I'll be honest, until I started thinking about these things, which eventually led me to be an atheist and follow this career path, I didn't have even the shadow of the kind of direction that you have. So kudos. You're going to make your way very well in the world, particularly in the United States. But what I will say is that when you started this question, you said, where do these things come from? And I feel like I'm not arguing the semantics of it, right? Because the question is understandable, like the way that it's phrased. I know what you mean. But the idea that these feelings, what we call feelings, are a thing that is separate, that comes from somewhere, I don't think is particularly helpful, and I know isn't borne out by evidence. And so what I would say is, when Jamie feels sad, it's because Jamie feels sad and not because someone has sent sadness his way. And one of the things that you've said repeatedly throughout this call is that, well, I think these are things on a spiritual level. And I very much understand that, because my mind loves to go to that kind of thinking and to apply and find meaning and reasons behind why it's raining right now, for example. It's not, but rain is one of my favorite ones, because then you get to go dance in the rain. And if I stop and I think about it, I know, okay, well, weather patterns occur, particulates in the air, or rather water vapor in the air condenses onto particulates until the point where it's heavy enough that it can't, remain in the air, and then it falls to the ground. And we call this rain. However, there's a part of my human brain that developed on this planet in order to try and find its way that is biased towards there existing purpose for something, right? Beyond. And when I look at it, it's easy for me to say, you know what? It's rained during all of the, big momentous moments in my life. It rained when I found out I had a job. The last time I got a job before that, it rained. The night that I met my previous boyfriend, it rained. All these positive things have happened when it rained. Rain is a sign of good things happening in my life. But if I were to go back through my journal, everything I just said is true. But there are times when that isn't the case. There are times where something as good has happened and there wasn't rain. And if I look at that and I make a hypothesis about why it rains or where does this rain come from, and I do my best to interrogate and understand the world around me, I can come to a conclusion that water condenses onto particulates in the air and then it rains. And I can do my best to examine all of the neuroscience. I'm not a neuroscientist, and despite my love of science, I don't think I'm very good at it. I've certainly never conducted any scientific research that was published anywhere. But the more that we can understand things, like, for example, the sensation of pain, we have a relatively good understanding of. We have anesthesiologists that are designed to alleviate it for surgery. And we, to a greater and greater degree, are starting to understand even deeper psychological motivations, starting to understand deeper psychological motivations for things like depression and for things like sadness. And the temptation is to say, well, these are things that are beyond humanity. There is still magic in the world. And it's mysterious. And whether or not you believe, oh, I can pray and affect it, there's something about that. Having a complete worldview where you can say, yes, there is an understanding of everything that is very, very, very attractive for the human mind, yours and mine. And I think that way lies the end of greater understanding. And I would say continue to look into these things, because there's psychological research, there's neurological research, and yeah, the brain ain't simple. Feelings ain't easy.
For sure.
Like that, and because we have ethics, we can't just do a shit ton of experiments on children randomly, because we let human beings live their own lives. So we can't have, we're going to subject this child to sadness and we're going to control this child, right? Or put this child in a boarding box. But the point I'm saying is, I think it's when you look at it and when you follow the research, it's humans. And I would tell you that that's magical, because it is.
Ooh, it's quite a long answer.
Yep.
Hope that was what you were looking forward to.
It was. It's a pretty good answer. It's close to what I was looking for. And my second question is, I have a friend, right? And I'd say he's agnostic, atheist. He's not really sure if he believes in a God yet. He's still searching like I am. But I know that right now he had the loss of his grandma, and he was really close to his grandma. And, he's not sure if there's a heaven or hell, but if he was an atheist, it is kind of scary for, personally me, if there wasn't a God and we just are a bunch of monkeys or whatever we came from, right? If we're just people, and I'll just say people in general. It doesn't have to be that we're descendants of monkeys. It could just be that we're people on this planet, right? If someone was to die, and our time is going to come one day, so that's something to think about, but it's honest truth. So my question is, for people who, because I can't just straight up tell them, oh, there's a God, don't worry, you're going to go to, your grandma's going to go to heaven and you'll meet her in heaven one day. Because I get it, not a lot of people believe in that. So I don't want to just say, don't worry, man, God's got a plan for your life. Now, that's what I believe, but it may not be what he believes, and I don't want to offend him in any sort of way. So you guys being an atheist, and this is kind of the main reason why I called, rather than the Pascal's wager. I have a friend who's an atheist, and he's not sure how to live his life and approach now that his grandma's dead. And I don't want to just say, well, too bad, she's gone. You can't do anything to change that. That is true, but I don't want to just say she's rotting 6 feet underground and she's just becoming into dust and bone that's eroding. So I don't want to just put it in a mean way, but at the same time, because me believing in a God, I want to say so bad that, God's got a plan for your life. So how is the best way to go towards him? My friend's name is Robert. What's the best way for me to go towards him and say, hey man, this is what you can do with a hope for a future? And I know there's a couple of atheists who've written a book on this where, what people do when they die and how to recover from that.
Dylan, what an excellent question.
Yes.
That is a very thoughtful question of you to ask. And I'm so glad that this is what you're thinking of. I think Jamie and I both have responses to this. I'm just going to say we're going to try to wrap things up now because we've been talking for a long time. But
don't worry, Dylan. That's him telling me to talk quickly.
But that's okay because this has been an excellent call. So and you've been asking excellent questions that deserve excellent answers. So again, I'm just going to start off with my response that I think Jamie should give his, and I think we'll just go ahead and kind of wrap up the call. But gosh, I don't think that you necessarily need to tell him anything. I think just being there for him and just comforting him in his time and seeing what he needs and asking him what's going to be good for him is what you need to do first. I think there's something about human psychology that when we see somebody grieving and in trouble that we want to help them sometimes and we want to give them some comfort or words of advice or all kinds of things. But sometimes that's not what's actually best for people, at least in that moment, especially after so close a loss. I think just demonstrating and saying, hey, I'm here for you, and being present with that person and just showing them the love. If you interpret that love through the love of Jesus, go for it. But I do think that expressing it in those terms and saying, this is God's plan for you, and this is my theology, and this is my belief, is going to rub him the wrong way because that's not really the best time to kind of talk about those things, right? His mind is in a million other places. And I think it's, like I said, it's best to just be present with what's going on in that moment, what he needs, like right in the then and now. And sometimes people process grief in different ways, and that might be something you want to research a bit more too. Some people like to talk about the good memories they have with that person. Some people just like to be silent for a bit, but they appreciate the company. Whatever it is, as long as you're present for that person and you're asking them what they need instead of giving what you think they need at every moment, I think you'll be doing a good job.
All right, thank you. I really appreciate this call. You guys are amazing, And I'll definitely give a call back next weekend if I have any more questions because, you guys seem like you know a lot. So
hey,
I'll definitely give a call back.
Please, Dylan, call back. And if you want to message me, I have an email address. It should be at the bottom of the screen there. But it's atheist. It's truth at atheist-community.org. And I would love to hear from you in the future. And you are more than welcome to call back anytime.
And real quick before you go.
And Jamie was going to say something. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll cut out most of my answer because I think that Dan covered it excellently. It's about what they need to grieve and not about your thing. The thing in human psychology where we see someone we care about suffering and we want them to not have to suffer. The temptation to say, no, it is okay because we want it to be okay is there. But even for people that believe there's a heaven, telling them, oh, but your dead relative is in heaven, doesn't help alleviate the psychological loss because sure, they're in heaven, but when you go to sleep and wake up, they're not there, right? They're not here, I should say. And so despite the temptation to say, no, it's okay, or, oh, no, it's going to be okay. There's an excellent talk that I've been to by Greta Christina on this, where she said, among other things, and she used her own personal experience of just saying a few things. That sucks, because it does. Psychological loss is terrible. And Robert, if you're ever watch this in future, I'm sorry for your loss. That sucks. If you can be there for them and say, I'm here for you in any way that I can. If you have experienced a loss, say, I've experienced this, it's not easy. But the fourth thing, but it does alleviate over time. It won't always be this crushing. Is something that's very helpful because it's a kind of like hope for the future. And I think Dan covered all of that just with different words, so I should have not repeated all of it. What I will say is, particularly if he's looking for a place to grieve where he's not so interested in preying on it, recovering from religion has a hotline where whether or not he's trying to leave religion or find religion, where they'll talk to him about this grief in non-religious terms, and they won't push belief or non-belief on him. And I would say you should call back. And then also, if Robert is willing to call, we're not psychologists, but I'm able to be as friendly as possible. I don't know how much Dan wants his show to be the grieving loved ones call-in show, but
well, we are human beings, and that is a part of why we believe. It is a strong reason why, to give us hope in circumstances where hope isn't always something that can be seen.
The problem is you can't tell him that, no, his grandma's fine. She's just, on a farm upstate playing in a field with other grandmas, and it's really happy, and they get carrots 3 times a day or whatever. Because, but it's a good thing you're doing for your friend. You called in, which is, again, very brave. And you have been an excellent caller. So.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I'll definitely call back if I got some more questions. I'll definitely write some notes. And, I'll definitely give a call back next Friday. I'm sure you guys are doing a live stream every Friday. So if I got any questions, I'll write down some questions. And I'll definitely try and battle you. It's a battle. It's a friendly battle. It's not a angry battle, but it's friendly.
Let's avoid using battle. Let's call this an exploration. Let's call this a dialogue.
That's a better word. I like that. That doesn't sound so hostile.
Yeah, because I have nothing against you, Dylan. I have there's nothing for me to win here. If the one thing I can win is if I can help make you think about where you're at in life, and if I can offer something to you that resonates with you, and that's winning to me. So if that's the battle, then I'm winning in that sense, because I feel like we've had a great conversation here, and I'd love to do that more.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'll definitely call back next.
All right, we'll see you next week, hopefully, Dylan.
All right, see you later. Bye-bye.
What a wonderful, wonderful call, Jamie.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Yeah.
I love it because
I really am jealous, actually. that's an excellent caller. Yeah.
Honesty is something you can find a lot more with young people. I tend to find.
Yeah.
I think the older we get, sometimes we close ourselves off to these options and things. Whether it's just
you're less likely to come to the conclusion that you already know everything and have seen everything.
Yes.
If you haven't seen everything yet.
For sure. And I'm 16 years old, Jamie. I was not at that level
no.
of talking to people at 16. I think that, but it just goes to show you that you can't make judgments about people's paths in life until you just talk with them and see what they're all about. And it was just, gosh, I'm really glad that we had that conversation. So I hope, Dylan, if you're listening, you get to call again next week, because I'd love to keep that conversation up. But here's what's going to happen. We still have 2 more calls that Jamie and I are going to talk to you, but it is about the end of the show time. So we are going to save these calls as extra Patreon content. So if you really like this show and you want to help support it and you want to help the ACA as a whole through your donations, not just for my show, but for Talk Heathen, Atheist Experience, and all the other productions that go on here, please consider donating to my Patreon, where we will be hopefully releasing this and other calls as content in the future. As Dylan was saying, we'll be doing another stream next week with Rice Blakennagel of the Naked Mormonism podcast, which I am super hyped about. So if you guys know any Mormons or ex-Mormons for that matter, or anybody involved in that community, I would love for you guys to plug them into this show because Bryce is the perfect guy to have conversations about that with. As always, you can subscribe to the Truth Wanted YouTube channel to see more content from here. We're also on Spreaker and iTunes. Jamie, where can people find you at?
People can find Talk Heathen on YouTube and on all of the various ACA media. We do our best to cross-pollinate. So, for example, me showing up on this show.
Yeah.
I'll, we have a Patreon as well, but Patreon/TruthWanted is a good way to get the bonus content here, or the extra content here, and support the ACA and the show and the mission. So you can find the YouTube channel that I co-host. I'm usually not this verbose. I've fixed that. At Talk Heathen, YouTube/C/Talk Heathen. So.
Yeah, for sure. And we also have associated Facebook pages for both of our groups that you can join. Jamie and I both show up on Discord from time to time on the ACA Discord, so you can find us on there. And you can also message me at truth@atheist-community.org. I personally read all the messages that come in. I like to hear your guys' responses to the show, what you think we can do more, any kinds of questions. Some people ask me, hey, is this a good topic for the show? And usually I'm like, yeah, go for it. Hopefully we'll be getting some more advertising out soon. I am working on trying to get some business cards and maybe some flyers and some other things. I don't know. We'll see. And this show has been growing a lot in these past few weeks. And it's all thanks to the viewers like you who are watching this and are making this show a success. So thank you so much. So we will now go on to our patron-only callers. So we're going to go ahead and end the show here. Thank you guys for watching. And remember, always keep wanting the truth. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.